Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're going to break down some of the things that are quietly holding a lot of elk hunters back, and a lot of them don't even realize it because the truth is most elk hunters aren't failing from a lack of effort. I talk about that a lot. A lot of guys are putting in miles, they're spending the time, but they're doing it based on outdated or incomplete beliefs about how elk actually live and move. And elk hunting has changed. This is 2026, right? Pressure is higher, access is easier, technology is improved, and the conditions elk are living in today are not the same as they were even a decade ago. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years, and I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent elk hunter and outdoorsman. The problem is that a lot of advice out there hasn't changed with the times, right? These are myths that are subtle. They feel true because at one point they were, but right now they're costing you opportunities. So in this episode, we're breaking down 10 elk hunting myths that are quietly sabotaging your hunt and what actually holds up in real elk country today. Myth number one, you have to go deep to find elk. I love this one. This is one of the most common beliefs in elk hunting, and it sounds logical. I personally like to get as far away from people as possible. It's a people problem, though, not an elk problem. Go further than everybody else, and you'll find elk that haven't been pressured, and that used to hold more truth. But today, it's incomplete. Pressure doesn't just push elk deeper, it redistributes them. What happens now is elk adapt to how hunters move, and most hunters follow the same patterns: trails, access points, obvious drainages, and the mindset of go as far as possible. So elk don't just run away from pressure, they shift around it. A lot of elk end up living in what I call the in-between zones, not right next to the road necessarily, but not 8 miles deep either. And those are overlooked pockets like thick, uncomfortable terrain, broken timber, steep side hills, or areas that just don't look appealing on a map. In 2026, with mapping tools like OnX and better gear, deep isn't what it used to be. More hunters are capable of getting in there, which means pressure is more evenly spread across the landscape. The takeaway is this: distance alone doesn't create opportunity anymore. Position relative to the pressure does. Myth number two, if there's no sign, there are no elk. And this one can be confusing. It's where a lot of hunts start to fall apart. You get into an area, you're looking for tracks, poop, rubs, maybe fresh sign, and when you don't see it, you assume elk aren't there. Now, I've got videos talking about not wasting time in areas if you're not finding those things, right? So how do you find the distinction between the two? The assumption that elk aren't there when there's no sign can be wrong because sign is dictated by timing, conditions, and terrain. Dry ground doesn't hold tracks well. Light use areas don't get torn up. Steep side hills, dark timber, and bedding zones often show very little visible sign, even when elk are using them consistently. Elk can be there, and you just don't see the evidence you're expecting. And this is where a lot of elk hunters misread the situation. They might think they're in the wrong area when in reality, they're just out of sync with how elk are using that particular area at that moment. Maybe they're at the wrong time of day. Maybe elk are transitioning through quickly. Maybe you're just not quite at the right elevation band, right? Maybe they're bedding in a way that doesn't leave much behind. The key shift is understanding the difference between absence of sign and absence of elk, because if you don't recognize that difference, you can be leaving elk to go look for what feels like better ground, right? And so there's a whole spectrum of things that you could analyze here. Don't get married to one piece of country, one area, and stick with it no matter what, right? If you consistently don't find the right sign and you're not seeing or hearing elk, right? But also don't just bump around randomly just because the one walk you took didn't turn up any sign, right? So the time of year could be, determining whether elk are talking a lot or not, or how much movement's happening, the heat, all sorts of situations are going to factor in there. So all I'm saying is make sure that you're leaving for the right reasons and you're staying for the right reasons. Myth number three, elk only use remote pretty country. A lot of elk hunters fall into this without realizing it. They're drawn to big, beautiful basins, open parks, and places that just look like they should hold elk. And while elk will use that kind of country at times, it's not what drives their daily decisions during hunting season. Elk don't prioritize scenery, they prioritize survival. That means security, wind advantage, and how pressure moves through the landscape. If a place looks good to you, there's a really good chance it looks good to other hunters too, and that changes how elk use it. What often gets overlooked are the less appealing areas. Thick tangled timber, steep broken side hills, dark north facing slopes, pockets that are harder to move through, harder to glass, and easier for elk to stay hidden in. Those areas aren't pretty, but they offer what elk actually need: cover, escape routes, and consistent wind behavior. The shift here is to stop judging terrain by how it looks and start evaluating it by how it functions, because a lot of hunters are hiking past elk every year, not within 20 yards, but within, let's say a half a mile, on their way to places that look better but don't actually hold elk.
Hey, if you hunt public land elk and you're tired of grinding through random seasons, I built the elk hunting series of ebooks for you. Most hunters don't struggle because they lack effort. They struggle because they lack a system. And that's exactly why I built the elk hunting ebook series as a complete progressive framework for Western elk hunters who are done guessing and ready to hunt with intention. Volume 1 is going to be Foundations and Reality. I reset your mindset and expose the assumptions that quietly wreck seasons. In Volume 2, Finding Elk and Understanding Pressure, you'll learn how elk actually move under pressure so you can anticipate instead of react. In Volume 3, Terrain, Wind, and Position, I break down how to use landscape and thermals to consistently create opportunities. In Volume 4, Calling, Silence, and Pressure, sound becomes a decision tool, not an impulse. In Volume 5, Bow Hunting Execution, we're talking about close range strategy so you can finish your encounters. And in Volume 6, Late Season and Post Rut, we're talking about how elk shift after the rut and how to adapt when others quit. This is a system built for consistency. This isn't theory, it's a structured system to help you find elk, read country, and make confident decisions every season. Buy each volume individually or bundle them all to save 50% off at backboneunlimited.com.
Myth number 4, elk move randomly. This is one of the biggest misconceptions in elk hunting. When hunters don't see consistent activity or elk don't show up where expected, it feels random, but that's not what's actually happening. Elk movement is structured. It's built around a consistent set of priorities: feed, bed, security, and wind. They move to feed where calories make sense. They bed where they can see, smell, and escape. They choose routes that protect them from danger. And everything they do is influenced by wind and thermals. When you don't understand all of those factors, elk movement sure looks unpredictable. But when you start recognizing how those pieces connect, patterns begin to show up. Travel routes start to make sense, timing starts to tighten up, encounters stop feeling accidental. The problem is a lot of elk hunters are reacting to moments instead of understanding the system behind them. They chase sightings, bugles, and fresh sign without asking why elk were there in the first place. The shift is moving from perceived randomness to predictable behavior, because elk aren't wandering around the mountains guessing what they should do next. They're making consistent decisions based on survival. And once you understand that, you can start getting in front of them instead of just chasing them. Myth number 5, morning and evening are the only times that matter. This idea comes from a lot of hunting traditions, and there's some truth to it, right? Elk do move during low light, but the problem is when hunters treat those windows as the only opportunities that matter, because that's not how elk behave anymore, especially in pressured country. Midday movement is more important than a lot of elk hunters realize. Not big, wide open feeding movement, and I'm not saying you have to hunt them during this time, but understanding that they're undergoing subtle repositioning. Elk are adjusting bedding locations, shifting with the thermals, responding to pressure, or tightening into security cover. And in 2026, this matters even more. Pressure has changed the timing of elk movement. In a lot of areas, elk are In a lot of areas, elk are reducing visible activity during prime morning and evening windows because that's when they expect hunting pressure. That's when they expect hunters to be out there. So they adapt. They move earlier, later, or in shorter, less predictable bursts. If you're only hunting mornings and evenings and checking out mentally or physically in between, you could be missing a huge part of what's actually happening out there. The shift is understanding that elk don't stop moving, they just move differently. And the hunters who stay engaged, pay attention to wind transitions, and hunt those quiet midday adjustments are the ones who can start finding opportunities that everybody else is missing. Myth number 6, if you bump elk, the area is burned. And this belief causes more hunters to abandon good elk than anything else. You bump a group, they blow out, everything goes quiet, and it feels like you just ruined the entire area. So you leave, thinking you need to start over somewhere new. But that's not what elk typically do. Elk don't just abandon areas, they adjust within them. What you're usually seeing is a micro relocation, not a full relocation. They move to the next layer of security, a thicker patch of timber, a steeper face, a better wind position, somewhere close that gives them an advantage again. I found a group of elk last year, bumped them. I snuck in, I thought that I was completely covered up, and there was one low cow, much lower than I thought, didn't spot her until it was too late. Whole herd leaves. 99% of the 34 elk there didn't know that I was even there. Only that cow knew, right? But it was enough to bump them. So they bump, and I go up high, maybe a couple hundred yards. It took me to get up on top, and I'm kind of moving along, and this bull is trying to round up the cow. So he's doing roundup bugle, and he's moving down below me, probably 300 yards or so, and I can follow. I'm just pivoting around basically the top of this mountain, and they're moving along, and I can follow their positioning below me until they got into a nasty little pocket where the wind probably suited them, and they just shifted, right? And so if I had left immediately, I'd have been walking away from elk that were still huntable. I just needed to reposition. Now, how you bump them obviously matters. Aggressive pressure or repeated disturbance is going to push them further away. But most single encounters don't just clear the drainage. The key shift is understanding the difference between blowing elk out of position and blowing them out of the area. Because if you treat every bump like the area is done, you're going to spend your entire season restarting instead of just adjusting. And that's exactly why a lot of hunters stay one step behind. Myth number 7, elk just go nocturnal under pressure. This is something you hear all the time. They've gone nocturnal. And while it can feel that way, it's not the full picture. Elk don't just disappear into the night. They change how and where they move during daylight. Under pressure, elk do increase their use of security terrain, right? They tighten into thicker cover, steeper side hills, darker timber, and areas where wind and thermals give them an advantage. Instead of broad, visible movement, they shift to shorter, more controlled movements inside those zones. So yes, you might see less activity in open areas during the day, but that doesn't mean elk aren't moving. It means you're not seeing where they're choosing to move to. You're not in the nastiest pocket that they want to be in. Their movement also tightens, right? Instead of traveling long distances in daylight, they operate in smaller, more efficient patterns between bedding, feed, and security. A lot of times those tighten up. Everything becomes more compact and harder for hunters to detect. The mistake a lot of elk hunters make is assuming elk have left or shut down when really they've just become more disciplined. The shift is recognizing that pressure doesn't eliminate daytime movement, it just reshapes it. And the elk hunters who adjust to that by focusing on secure terrain and tighter movement patterns are the ones who keep finding elk when everybody else just thinks that they've gone nocturnal. Myth number 8, calling is the key to killing bulls. Calling gets a lot of attention in elk hunting, right? And for good reason. It can be extremely effective. We all love it. I love to call elk, but the mistake is treating it like the foundation of success instead of what it really is, a situational tool. Calling only works when the conditions support it, right? If a bull is in the right mindset, in the right location, and feels secure, calling can absolutely create opportunity. But if those pieces aren't in place, pressure, wind, positioning, terrain, calling can just as easily hurt you. And in 2026, this matters more than ever. Bulls are more educated. They've heard calls, they've been pressured, they don't respond the same way across the board anymore. Responses are more selective, more cautious, and oftentimes tied to very specific situations. And that's why some hunters get frustrated. They're doing everything they've been told, calling aggressively, trying to force a reaction, and a lot of times it's not working. The shift is understanding that calling doesn't create elk behavior, it interacts with it. If you're not in the right place with the right setup and the right time, calling isn't going to magically fix that. But if you are, it can enhance it. And that's the difference between using calling as a tool and just relying on it as a do all crutch, right?
Step into the backcountry and step up your elk hunting game at Elk Camp 2026. This isn't a seminar, it's an immersive experience with real field training alongside successful elk hunters Matt and Saxton Hartsky. You'll learn how elk think and move, break down terrain like a pro, call with confidence, and practice 3 days of real-world elk hunting scenarios that mirror what you'll face on your own hunt. This camp was built to bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be in the mountains. With limited spots and hands-on coaching, you'll walk away sharper, more prepared, and ready to hunt with purpose and confidence. Elk Camp 2026. Sharpen your edge. Register now and prepare for the season like never before at backboneunlimited.com.
Myth number 9, you need to move constantly to find elk. A lot of elk hunters believe success comes from covering more ground. I used to think this way. Keep hiking, keep moving, keep searching, and you'll eventually run into elk. And early on, there's some truth to that. You do need to locate elk. But once you're in elk, constant movement becomes a problem. Movement without purpose leads to misencounters. You walk through areas too fast. You push into elk without realizing it. You blow opportunities before they ever develop. And a lot of times you don't even know it happened. And this is where the shift needs to happen. You've got to go from covering ground to hunting movement. That means slowing down, paying attention to wind, terrain, and how elk are likely using your area instead of trying to just find the next group. You've got to start anticipating where the elk you already found and know are in the area are going to be. Most blown encounters happen because hunters are still in search mode when they should be in hunt mode. There's a big difference there. Think about that for a minute. You can't keep moving when you should be setting up. The key is understanding when to move fast and when to slow down. I know that sounds frustrating, right? That's a big concept to work through, because once you're in elk, success doesn't come from doing more. It comes from doing less with more intention because you understand elk behavior. And myth number 10, more effort equals more success. This one hits a lot of hunters hard, myself included, because effort feels like the answer. If you hike further, climb higher, push longer than everybody else, it feels like success should follow, because a lot of times that's the way I think life is. But effort without structure doesn't create results. It just creates the opportunity for more burnout and more failure. What happens is hunters pour everything into physical output, but their decisions don't improve. They stay in bad areas too long. They push into the wind. They rush setups. They second guess themselves late in the day when fatigue sets in. And over time, that stuff compounds. The hunt becomes reactive instead of controlled. You're working hard, but you're not working effectively and efficiently. The shift is understanding that decision quality matters more than just physical output. Effort absolutely 100% still matters. You need to be capable in the mountains, but effort should support your decision, not replace them. The best elk hunters I know aren't always the ones covering the most miles. They're the ones making the fewest mistakes. They know when to move, when to stay, when to back out, and when to commit. Because in elk hunting, one good decision can create an opportunity, but 10 poor decisions, no matter how hard you work, is going to keep you from ever seeing it. Now, most of these myths exist for the same reason. Hunters are chasing moments instead of understanding systems. They react to what just happened instead of anticipating what's about to happen next. They hear a bugle and go. They see fresh sign and move. They bump elk and leave. Everything is just reaction based, and that's where consistency breaks down. What I've been trying to encourage in a lot of these videos is replacing that randomness with structure. I'd encourage you to work on locating, evaluating the situation, how you're going to position yourself, executing, right, with control, and then adjusting and learning from every single one of those opportunities. First, you locate elk, not just randomly, but with intention. Then you evaluate the situation, the wind, the terrain, the pressure, the timing. From there, you position yourself based on how elk are likely to move. You've got to understand them. Then you execute when the opportunity is right. And if it doesn't work out, you adjust without just starting over randomly. We've got to learn and build on every opportunity. This system replaces guesswork with decision making, and it works across everything, different pressure levels, different terrain types, and every phase of the season, because elk behavior doesn't change randomly. It stays consistent. What changes is how they express it based on the conditions. A lot of elk hunters struggle because their approach keeps changing. The ones who become consistent are the ones who don't. Most elk hunters aren't as far off as they think. They're putting in the effort, they're getting close, but they're just slightly misaligned in how they're interpreting what's actually happening in the field. And that's the difference. When you start correcting these myths, you're not starting over. You're now refining. You're removing the small misunderstandings that lead to missed opportunities. That's what shortens the learning curve, because the truth is, it doesn't take decades to figure this out. Not anymore. It shouldn't. There's so much good information out there. It just takes recognizing what's not working and then being willing to adjust to it, right? To learn from it, to start questioning your assumptions. Don't just accept what you've heard or what used to work. Pay attention to what elk are actually doing right now. Learn their behavior in the conditions you're hunting. Make that shift and everything starts to connect faster. Most elk hunters don't need more time. They need a better understanding of what's actually true. If you want to go deeper into elk movement, pressure patterns, terrain positioning, and structured decision making, that's exactly why I built the elk hunting series of ebooks. It's a progressive system designed to help you understand how elk actually use country and how to position yourself accordingly. I have a link to those ebooks in the description. If you want hands-on application and real-time breakdowns, we have an in-person Elk Camp 2026 that is built around this same philosophy: structure, preparation, and execution in real terrain. 90% of Elk Camp is going to be walking you through different scenarios. You can check that out at backboneunlimited.com. And if you want ongoing access to the Team Backbone community, classroom, my full digital vault of elk resources, private discussions, and direct communication to me for planning, you can join Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Everything we talk about here is connected. Preparation is not a single video, it's a system. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.